the world woke up to a thunderclap. Headlines flashed across financial capitals from New York to Paris. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger push one currency. IMF caught off guard. It wasn't just another story buried in the business section. It was a declaration of war, a financial revolution from the heart of West Africa. For decades, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, dictated Africa's economic fate. Loans came with strings. Policies came with chains. And currencies, tied to colonial systems like the CFA franc, kept nations dependent. But in 2025, something broke. Three young leaders, united under the banner of AES, the Alliance of Sahel States, stood up and said, "No more." Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, Colonel Assimi Goïta of Mali, General Abdourahmane Tiani of Niger. Three men, three nations, one dream, a currency that Africans control, not Paris, not Washington, not the IMF. The IMF is shocked. But Africa? Africa is awakening. To understand the shock, we must travel back. Back to the colonial blueprint that still shapes Africa today. For decades, 14 African nations were locked into the CFA franc, a currency created by France. On the surface, it looked stable, but in reality, it was economic handcuffs. 50% of their reserves had to be kept in France. France controlled the monetary policy, and no major decision could be made without Paris's approval. Even after independence, France's shadow loomed over African treasuries. And the IMF? Instead of breaking the chains, it reinforced them. Structural adjustment programs, austerity, cuts to education, healthcare, and infrastructure. The message was clear. Africa could borrow, but Africa could never truly own. That's why this new move by Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger is more than just monetary policy. It's economic liberation. It's a direct challenge to France, to the IMF, to the entire Western-dominated global order. In Ouagadougou, when reporters asked Traoré about IMF warnings, his reply was sharp, almost poetic. "We will no longer be slaves of financial colonialism. Our currency will be born from our soil, our gold, our uranium, and the sweat of our people." A standing ovation followed. The IMF had warned that such a move would destabilize economies. But Africans heard something different, a call to dignity. Mali echoed the message. Goïta declared that Malians would no longer measure wealth in Paris, but in Bamako. And Niger, rich in uranium that powers French homes while Nigerians sit in the dark, vowed to make its resources the backbone of this new financial order. The IMF's official response: deep concern. But behind closed doors? Panic. Why is the IMF so rattled? Because if Africa succeeds in creating a stable, independent currency, the ripple effect will be unstoppable. France loses control of the CFA franc zone. Billions in reserves will no longer flow to Paris. The IMF loses leverage. Without dependency on loans, nations can refuse IMF dictates. Global markets shift. Imagine African nations trading oil, gold, and uranium in their own currency instead of dollars or euros. It's not just about Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. It's about a domino effect that could spread across the continent. From Senegal to Chad, from Guinea to the Central African Republic. If the Sahel can do it, so can the rest of Africa. And that's why the IMF is trembling. But let's step away from boardrooms and policies. What about the people? In Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Niamey, crowds gathered in the streets. Flags waved. Drums beat. Young men and women shouted, "Down with the IMF. Long live African unity." For ordinary citizens, this wasn't just politics. It was hope. Hope that food prices would no longer skyrocket every time the IMF demanded currency devaluation. Hope that schools and hospitals would be funded, not cut. Hope that Africa could finally stand tall. The people are watching Traoré and his allies with faith and fire. If they succeed, a new era begins. If they fail, the disappointment could be crushing. Beyond Africa, the world is watching. In Washington, policymakers whisper about instability in West Africa. In Paris, officials warn of a geopolitical disaster. In Beijing and Moscow, leaders smile quietly, seeing opportunity. Because a united African currency doesn't just weaken the IMF. It creates space for new alliances. China could trade directly in African currency, bypassing the dollar. Russia could invest in uranium and gold without Western strings. Even the BRICS alliance sees this as a perfect chance to welcome new members. The Sahel's bold step could accelerate the decline of Western dominance and the rise of a multipolar world. But let's be real. Creating a currency is no easy task. It requires central banking systems, reserves to back the money, a plan for inflation, trade, and debt, and the IMF will not sit idle. Expect sanctions. Expect pressure on neighboring states. Expect propaganda campaigns painting the Sahel as reckless. But Traore knows this. And still, he pushes forward. Because this isn't just about economics. It's about history. It's about dignity. It's about a continent reclaiming what was stolen. Picture this. The year is 2030. A mother in Burkina Faso buys bread with a new West African note bearing the symbol of unity. In Niger, uranium is sold to power plants, paid in African currency, not euros. In Mali, children study in schools funded not by IMF loans, but by Africa's own wealth. The IMF, once the master of Africa's fate, is reduced to watching from the sidelines. And the world finally realizes, Africa has risen. As Traore said in his boldest speech yet, we will not be judged by Paris. We will not be commanded by Washington. We are Africa, and Africa will stand. The IMF may be shocked, but for Africa, this is not shock. This is destiny. The story of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger's bold move is not just history in the making. It is the voice of Africa echoing across generations. But here's the truth. The global media will not tell this story the way it deserves to be told. CNN won't show you the heartbeat of Ouagadougou's streets. BBC won't let you feel the fire of Traore's words. The IMF's friends in the press will try to twist the narrative, painting resistance as recklessness. That is why African voices must rise. That is why African stories must be told by Africans. And that is why this channel, African Spotlight 24, exists. To shine a light where the world prefers darkness. To tell the stories of Africa's revolutionaries, dreamers, and builders. To give you the truth, raw and unfiltered. So if you believe in this new Africa, an Africa that stands tall against exploitation, an Africa that writes its own destiny, then you are already part of this movement. But movements grow stronger with unity. Click subscribe to African Spotlight 24 right now. Join thousands who refuse to be left in the dark. Be the first to know when the next thunderclap shakes the world from Africa's heart. Because this is not just a channel. This is not just news. This is the African Spotlight. And together, we will not just watch history. We will make history.
Welcome to African Spotlight 24, your premier source for news and current affairs from across the continent. We're glad you're here. If you're new to our channel, please subscribe, like, and turn on notification to stay up to date with the latest news and analysis. Your support helps us reach more people. Disclaimer: the content of this video is based on credible, publicly available information and is intended for educational, analytical, and informational purposes only. African Spotlight 24 does not promote hate, violence, misinformation, or political unrest. Our goal is to deliver thoughtful insights, highlight local voices, and encourage informed conversations throughout Africa.